My name is Naomi Skulon. I'm the Metadata and Technical Services Coordinator at the University of Minnesota Morris. And I'm going to be talking today about oral history collections in Digital Commons. So at our institution, we always start with a land acknowledgement, so I'm going to do that quick. The University of Minnesota Morris is located on land that has been cared for and called home by the Dakota people and later the Ojibwa people and other Native peoples from time immemorial. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm tribal sovereignty and express respect for Native peoples and nations. So to give a little background about our institution, because it really matters for what kinds of oral histories we have and how we put them in, we are a small residential public liberal arts college out in the prairie. We have about 1,000 students and they're all undergraduates, so we do not have any graduate programs at our institution. And we have a really unique campus history. So the land that our institution is currently on had 2 Native American boarding schools on that land. One was Catholic, the other was federal, until 1909. And then we had the West Central School of Agriculture, which was an agricultural high school, with the University of Minnesota Morris starting in 1960. So pretty late for a lot of colleges. We're also in rural West Central Minnesota, so we are not near the Twin Cities, we are not near any large metropolitan area. We are very rural, and that plays a big role in the types of collections that we have. We have a West Central Minnesota Historical Research Collection, which we're very proud of, that talks about the history and livelihoods of people in rural West Central Minnesota. So with that background, I always like to start with talking about our mission and vision, because I think this has become more and more important as the financial situation in higher ed has gotten worse. A lot of times we have to prove our value to our administrators. And so I always like to tie the work that I'm doing back to the mission and vision of my institution, because then I can tell administrators, look, we are firmly doing the things that we say we are doing in our mission and our vision. We're supporting these key core aspects of the education here. And so for our oral histories, that has to do with the mission and of public outreach and a deep sense of community. Those are really key parts of our mission. And then in our vision, we even say that we're grounded in our sense of history and place. And so we can use that to show why it's so important to be spending time, money, funding, anything on these collections and why they're worthwhile. So our Digital Commons instance is called the Digital Well, and it collects, typical institutional repository items. We have a lot of faculty research, we have a lot of student research, we have journals, but we also have spent a lot of time adding archival collections to our institutional repository. That ranges from things that are useful for our administrators, like committee and governance documents, as well as things that are super useful to our community, things like news clippings, event videos, newsletters, our oral history collections, obviously, and then digitized campus publications. So we have spent a lot of time increasing these collections in the last 5 to 10 years, and we've gotten a lot of usage and a lot of community connection because of that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what our oral history collections are, because they are a little unique. We have kind of 2 major collections. One are our historical oral history collections. These were collections that were done mostly in the 1970s and 1980s. They had been on cassettes, reel-to-reels. None of them were digital when I started. And so they were really, really inaccessible to our community. And so we did get grants. We got one grant for digitization of about 400 oral histories, and then another grant for transcription of those same oral histories, so we could add them to the institutional repository. And so these kinds of collections range from things that are really important for our local community in that West Central Minnesota Historical Research Collection. They range from things on World War II, the home front in West Central Minnesota, county oral histories, like they went county by county and were collecting oral histories in the 70s, an Irish American project talking about Irish American ethnicity. And it also includes some student collections that were done in the 80s and 90s. We had a faculty member who was really interested in oral history as a method, and so he had students do collections on the golden age of radio in Stevens County and the introduction of TV. And so we thought those collections were really interesting as well. The quality, of course, is they were done by students, so we do put a little caveat in there that these were student-led oral histories, but they still have some really interesting takeaways. Once we got those digitized, we said, well, what more can we do? We don't want to just have these, oral histories from the 70s and 80s and stop there. And so we then worked on collecting modern oral histories. And so the collections that we have gotten range from things like retired faculty and staff to tell the history of our institution. We have 2 grant-funded projects right now, one on the history of Main Street business in West Central Minnesota, talking to business owners about what it's like having a business in kind of declining population towns and what that looks like in the advent of internet shopping. We have one on rural youth culture of the 50s and 60s, so that's people who were children and teens in the 50s and 60s in the area. And then we're also working with some classes. So we have a history professor. She's very interested in oral history as a method as well. And so just this spring, they did a history of the COVID-19 pandemic where they did oral histories with college students about their experiences in high school during the COVID, and sometimes middle school, depending on the age of the student, during the COVID-19 pandemic. We also are working with community partners. So we have a really interesting collection called Uniting Cultures, where we worked with a community group in St. James, Minnesota, that wanted to do an oral history project on immigration to that town. There was a big immigration of Latino and Latinx people to that area. And so they wanted to do an oral history project on that, which we get to host in our institutional repository. And then finally, as an archives, we're working on West Central School of Agricultural oral histories because those folks are in their 80s and 90s and we don't have much more time. So the biggest thing I wanted to talk about here was funding. That has been the biggest issue. We have to be very creative with how to fund some of these projects. Like I mentioned, some of them have been funded by grants. We've been able to get grants for particular projects. Some of them have been class partnerships, so all of the work is being done primarily by the students and the faculty member to prep those oral histories and to train the people to do all of those kinds of things. But we have had a lot of community partnerships. So we have this Center for Small Towns. It's kind of like our community outreach group on our campus, and they have been ones to put us in connection with different groups. So they connected us with the folks at St. James. We also are connected with some local historical societies and libraries who have been doing some oral histories for us as well. And then finally, we have what's called Morris Student Academic Fellowships. It's run by our Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, and it allows students to get a stipend to work on academic projects. And that has been really helpful for us because we can get a student for 6 to 8 hours a week. They get a stipend, so they're getting paid. And then we can do the training and they can work on these oral history projects for us. And then the last one I have on here is Archives Summer Camp. That's a program we'd run in the summer where we invite alumni to come back and work in the archives. They spend a week doing in-depth work in the archives, which has primarily been these oral histories. So they get to go out into the community, we do the training with them, and then they get to do the oral histories for us. And it's really beneficial for everyone because they get to learn about oral histories and do those, and then we get the final product. So one of the things I like to talk about with our oral history collections is the organization of collections. There's a lot of different ways to do this. It's kind of small, I think. But one thing that we really wanted was for it to be intuitive for users so that they could be searching for and finding the things that they were working with. So we talked with some folks, and there was a need for both things to be organized on a project level and by like a location level. People wanted to find all the oral histories for their town or for their area. And so that was kind of a conundrum for us because we didn't want to be uploading things in multiple places. That didn't make any sense to do all that extra work. And so we did find kind of a workaround. So we are adding everything to their project. So everything is organized by project topic if it's a standalone project. So the COVID ones are in their own little COVID project. The business ones are in their own little business project. If you go on our site, there's nothing in that right now because we're a little behind on the transcripts, but they'll be up there soon. And then any ones that didn't have a standalone project, like I said, in the 70s, they did a bunch of just county by county. They just were doing oral histories with whoever would do an oral history with them. And so those ones are organized by county. But then we said, well, how can we get the ones that are in projects, like in their individual projects, also listed by county so that all of those things are together? And we talked with our support person and they had a wonderful option for us. So I'm really excited to show you that. Before I go off this page, the other thing we did is we used book galleries for this instead of a traditional like series or any other like format. And we chose that because we wanted to have that thumbnail image of the person included when you're doing a browse of the oral histories. And we didn't have thumbnail images of everyone. A lot of those ones in the 70s, you know, it's with a farmer who was 80 years old and we don't have a photo of them. And so for anything that doesn't have a photo, we ended up putting like a little bookmark for like the project it was from, or the county it was from. We just created, you know, individual things. But ideally, we want to have a photo of that person so people can see what they look like. And then we also really liked that it provided that little summary on the browsing page where you could see, you could read the first 3 or 4 sentences of the description. And so someone could kind of look through that and say, oh, that's the one I want to listen to. That one's talking about this particular town or this particular topic. So to group these oral histories, we added all the non-project-based oral histories to an all Minnesota oral histories book gallery. And then we created book galleries for every county that we cover in West Central Minnesota. So we only included the counties that we have oral histories for, obviously. And then in the configuration tool of the county book galleries, you can go to collection to create a filter, and then you can choose the county field from those other areas, and it will pull in the things that have that county listed in that county field. So then you're not uploading them in multiple places, but they're showing up. If someone is browsing everything in Stevens County, they're seeing the like miscellaneous Stevens County stuff, but they're also finding the things on business in Morris or about rural childhood in Morris from those other collections. And so that really allowed us to have a better browsing experience for our users, because we found that, you know, unless someone is looking up someone's name in Google and that's how they're getting there because they're looking for their grandma for, you know, genealogy research or something, a lot of folks were going to our oral history collections and just browsing and looking through and seeing what they could find, because we have really been working on publicizing these collections, so they're getting a lot of use. So that kind of goes on to this next piece. To really make these collections usable and to get people to know about them, you have to do a lot of outreach. You can't just assume that like you build it and they will come. Not always. Like once again, if you know, if they're doing genealogy research, yes, they might find it through Google. But otherwise, people may not know that these exist. And so we have done a lot of outreach to tell people about these collections and to point them to the site. So we've done a lot of collaboration with local historical societies to tell them, you know, if you have people coming in looking for stories about any of these topics, please point them here. We've given them a lot of permissions to use the oral histories that we have in their exhibits. So that they can use those audio clips or maybe just a section of the transcript in some of the exhibits that they're doing. And they actually did do that recently. There's the Stevens County Historical Society did a thing on childhood or like fun things to do, recreation in the area in the like 60s and 70s. And so they used portions of our oral histories for those displays. We've done a lot of work with local media. So we talked to the local newspapers and we've done a lot of publishing of articles in local newspapers. The great thing about our local newspaper is if they considered a news article, they don't charge us for it. And so we have gotten some like front page or like second page stories talking about the oral history collections and telling people how they can access them. We also have done quite a few spots on local radio because we have a lot of folks who still listen to local radio by us, talking about the oral history projects, talking about how they can access those, and then also soliciting people for those oral histories projects, especially those 50s and 60s youth culture folks. They're the folks who are listening to a lot of radio by us. We've done a lot of sharing on social media, as one would expect. And then we link all of our oral histories to our archives management system, ArchivesSpace, so that people, when they're searching our archives, they have that direct link right out to the actual oral history. And then finally, transcripts are so important. You know, our first grant was just to digitize materials, but then we really needed that grant to get those transcripts because then you've got all of that machine-readable text. You're able to find materials a lot easier. Those oral histories are actually showing up for people, whereas before that, it was a little bit, they weren't as findable for folks. Also, that's been really important because we have had a lot of folks contact us and say, I couldn't understand what my grandpa said on that, you know, oral history tape from 1970, but with the transcript, I was able to get that story. So we've had a lot of good luck with that. So the last thing I want to talk about is kind of the opportunities and the challenges with this. So we have a lot of future goals. We're really just in deep with these projects right now. Like I said, we have a lot of work to do on transcriptions and things to get some stuff up. We're hoping to have a lot of that done by the end of the summer. We want to do a digital exhibit using the exhibits feature for the grant-funded oral history projects, the Rural Youth Culture and Main Street Business, to really showcase those collections. They're grant projects that will end in December, but we're hoping to continue with other funding. It's also a great opportunity for class collaborations and in-depth student projects. We've found that the students have learned a lot by working on these materials and creating oral histories. There's a lot of grant funding opportunities for different oral history projects depending on what the topic is. And we have gotten so much collaboration with community organizations and members. And this has really helped. There's a bit of a divide in our town between the town gown. You know, there's a lot of kind of distrust of academia in a rural Western Minnesota space. And so I think this has really helped us connect with our community in different ways. And I feel like because a lot of the community members get to take ownership of some of these projects, they really get to interact in a really one-on-one personal way. We've had a lot of success with making some good community partnerships with folks we wouldn't have necessarily partnered with otherwise. Some challenges: limited staffing. I am the person. I do cataloging and metadata and digital well and archives. So I'm like the only person. And so it can be really challenging to get projects to completion. We have lots of great ideas. We don't always have the means to finish them in a timely manner. We're working with a lot of students and volunteers because we don't have any paid staffing, and it's sometimes hard to get good follow-through from students and volunteers. They're really passionate and excited at the start, and then it just goes as the semester goes along. So trying to keep people engaged and actually doing the project has been some of our challenges. Paperwork management has been terrible because we're working with community members and students, and they're like, oh, I forgot to have them sign the release form, sorry. And I'm like, well, you can't do that. We need that. And so trying to get folks to kind of take it really seriously and make sure that all of the paperwork is in place has been a challenge. And then finally, time from start to finish of the project. For our community members, it can be frustrating. They think that we should have that oral history up within a week or two, and they're like, well, why isn't it available? I've been searching for it, I can't find it. Well, it takes us months. You know, it takes us months to go through the product from editing the audio, getting the transcript done, checking the transcript, making sure everything is in place, creating the metadata, and actually getting it online. So that has been a real challenge for us. We're working on trying to get that time frame shorter, but you can only do what you can do. So I did talk for like my whole time, but if anyone has questions.